Today's question is both a really good one and a really bad one at the same time, but here it is. How can I be more persuasive? How should I ask for things like numbers, dates, moving locations, but in a way that is more likely to get a yes? All right, so the reason why this is a very difficult question to answer, that the response you're going to get when you ask for something has less to do with how you ask than it has to do with everything else that's happened in the interaction. So asking in a non-optimal way to a girl that really likes you is more likely to work than asking optimally with a girl that doesn't like you. And so the answer to this question in effect is have better game. It's kind of equivalent to like if a salesman were to ask his sales trainer, how do I get more people to say yes to me? How do I ask them to buy in a way that gets more to say yes? And yes, there are a lot of techniques and tactics for that, but more importantly is, does the customer genuinely like the product? Does the customer genuinely trust you? Et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to sort of put that aside in answering this question, but know that having the girl like you, having the girl trust you, having framed yourself as a high value person, asking at the right point in the interaction, not too early when she doesn't know enough to say yes yet, and not too late when she already thinks you didn't have the balls to ask for anything and she's lost some respect for you, right? All of these things make a far bigger difference than asking in the right way. However, yes, there are better and worse ways to ask. So how to ask in a way that she's more likely to say yes to, number one. When you are asking for something, it's good to frame it, present it in such a way that it appears of benefit to her and not just to you. If you're asking her to do something because you want it, that's not very persuasive. If you're asking her to do something because it would be a fun experience for both of you, that's much more persuasive. If you're asking her to do it because she will gain some unique value out of it, or because it's an opportunity for her to get to know you better, which is something she wants because you've had a good interaction, those types of things are much more likely to get a yes. Along similar lines to presenting the choice as something of value to her, you want to present it as non-agenda to you. One way to do this is to make it less of a big deal. Now, most of you who watch my channel probably wouldn't even have thought of just saying, hey, do you want to come over and have sex? But a lot of normal guys do. You know, a girl seems into them, guy doesn't know exactly what to do, he just flat out blurts it out. And the girl can't say yes to it without feeling a little bit slutty, without feeling like, you know, the guy just wants me for sex, those kind of things. So being a little bit subtle about it can definitely help in a lot of cases. Beyond subtlety, just deciding what is the appropriate thing to ask for can make a big difference. If you're leaving a nightclub with a girl, it's a lot easier to ask her to go to another nightclub or to ask her to go to somewhere for food or somewhere quieter to have another drink than it is to ask her to go directly back to your place. Now, if things are really going well, it may well be appropriate to ask her to go back to your place as well. All I'm saying is that you're more likely to get a yes to those smaller escalations. Now, the yes back to your place is worth more. It's a better yes. It's a stronger yes. And even if you do get those smaller yeses, i.e., let's go to another venue, let's go eat, you're going to have to eventually ask her to go back to your place if you want to take her home that night. So granted, I get all of this. But within the individual asking for something smaller is more likely to get a yes than asking for something bigger. Along those lines, there's also a thing called a yes ladder, which is that when you ask for something and get a yes, that level of compliance from the first yes actually makes the second yes easier. So it's oftentimes easier to ask for something small, have her say yes, and then ask for the bigger thing and do it in 2 steps like that, than to ask directly for the thing you want. The next principle in being more persuasive about getting what you want is that it's better to get it right the first time rather than having her say no and having to work through a rejection and turn things back around. And so on a practical level, how can we use this, or how can this affect the way we ask for things? So let's say you're asking a girl to meet up with you. Well, that's a complex thing because you're asking her, number one, to meet up with you in principle. Number two, to meet up at a specific location. Number three, to meet up at a specific time. Let's say you're inviting a girl to meet up with you. Well, you're not actually just asking for one thing. What you're asking for is a little bit complex. You're asking for her to meet up at a specific time, 1, specific location, 2, specific activity, 3, and then beyond that, even underneath all of that, you're asking her just in general whether she even wants to meet up with you at all. So it's almost 4 separate questions all at once. And if the answer to any of those 4 is no, then the answer to the overall question is no. Oftentimes it's easier to screen out the different parts of that question before asking it. So instead of saying, do you want to meet up at Joe's bar on Tuesday at 7 p.m., you might be like, what does your schedule look like this week? And then it turns out she's free on Tuesday. You say, okay, maybe a drink then? She goes, yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. Let's do Joe's bar after work. Cool. How about 7? Right? So you created a yes ladder. Again, yes, 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 yes. But also, each step along the way, you ensured that you weren't running into a few of the different logistical issues. You ensured that some of the possible objections, like objection to time or objection to location or objection to activity, didn't exist before you made a final offer. And doing it that way, you're much less likely to hear a no. If you did hear a no up front, you have two problems. Number one, it's hard to get someone to back down off of a no. Number two, if you ask that general question and you got a no, you don't know if she just can't make Tuesday, she can't make the evening, or she doesn't want to see you. And so it's hard to know how to handle it unless you break it down into those individual parts anyway. Next tip about being persuasive. Typically, people don't make decisions logically. They make decisions emotionally and then justify them logically. They buy what they want and then they justify that it's in their budget, for example. So when you're persuading somebody of something, try not to focus primarily on the logic part. Try and focus on the emotions first, and then you can fill in the logic afterwards. The phrase we use for this in game is change her mood, not her mind. So typically getting the girl happy, smiling, laughing, having a good time with you will be a better way to get her to say yes to something than going point by point and explaining the features of the thing you're asking her to. While you're in the process of asking, if you can keep the conversation itself fun, that really helps. This comes up a lot in text game, where guys they'll have a fun text interaction with a girl, and then when it's time to make plans, all their texts suddenly become, how's 7 o'clock? Let's do this place. And they're all very robotic, kind of like you're the secretary making plans, kind of a scheduling text only. Whereas if you can keep a little bit of flirtation and lighthearted banter throughout, for example, like, we can do 7 o'clock as long as you promise that's not past your bedtime, winky face. Something like that is much better than, how's 7, or does 7 work for you, right? Keeping a little personality, keeping a little banter, keeping a good mood and some fun vibe as you're asking really does make a big difference. Final bit of advice on persuasion, at least for this video, is although I've given you all these different ways to ask and be successful the first time and not hear a no, sometimes you will still not hear a yes the first time you ask. It is sometimes important to ask multiple times. They did in sales research where they figured that on average, the sale was made on the third time someone asked somebody to buy something, not on the first, right? So it is important to be able to ask multiple times. However, if you ask and hear a no, it's important to back off, recreate a good vibe, add some new information on which they could make a yes decision, and only then ask again. Also, when you ask again, don't ask for the exact same thing they said no to, right? Because then they have to admit they were wrong. So if you asked a girl to go with you for ice cream and she said no, back off, make a good vibe, and then ask her for coffee, for example, right? So ask her for a different thing than the thing she just said no to. So sometimes you do have to ask multiple times, but even then you want to keep these principles in mind. Keep in mind the principle of keeping her mood good, keep in mind principles of asking the right way, asking it as a benefit to her, and also keep in mind the idea of listening, figuring out the objections, and solving them before you ask. So that's a lot of different content on how to ask the right way, and it should make you much more persuasive. It should help you get a yes much more often, but I do want to reiterate at the end the same thing I said at the start, which is even with all these techniques, the most critical thing about hearing yes is the overall interaction. If she likes you and you ask in a clunky way, you'll probably still hear a yes. If she doesn't like you and you ask super, super smooth, you're quite likely to still hear a no. So while all of this information is incredibly valuable, incredibly useful, and will dramatically increase your percentages of success, it's still less important than the girl fundamentally liking you. It's still less important than just having good game in general. So focus on that first, but keep these other things in mind. Hope you enjoyed the answer. Hope you learned a lot. Put your questions below, put your thoughts below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you on the next video.